Welcome to the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. If you enjoy the conversation, it'd be great if you could like, if you could review, you can comment, and if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search under the hashtag JHB Show. Enjoy. Well, education has never been far from the heart of British politics, ever since Tony Blair said that his three priorities were education, education, education. Every single GCSE result, every A-level result, every SATs test for a 7-year-old has seemed to be a political point-scoring exercise. Well, my guest today is one of those who seems to have got into the middle of that battle, and that battle is still very much raging after the Labour Party conference and a pledge from Jeremy Corbyn that in the next Labour government will effectively abolish private schools and indeed free schools and academies. Well, my guest is Katharine Birbalsingh. She is the founder and the head teacher of the Michaela Community School in North West London. Hello to you.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us. I wanted to speak to you today after the announcements from Labour Party conference about private schools and the battleground that we've got over how to improve not just standards in state schools but also improve social mobility through education. So there may be some people watching this saying, well, what does Katharine Birbalsingh have to say about this? Who is she? So if you could explain, first of all, why you first came to prominence, because this all goes back 9 years now to the Conservative Party conference, 2010. David Cameron was Tory leader, and you got a rousing standing ovation after speaking at the Conservative Party conference. Quite a thing for a state school deputy head, as you then were. What is it that you said that caused, well, such cheers from the Tories and eventually caused you to basically lose your job as a deputy head?
Well, I gave this speech that I essentially said the system was broken, the education system, and I think that people were in denial about that. I think people are a little bit more honest nowadays. There's still an argument over it, but it's actually an argument. In those days, you really weren't allowed to say that.
Especially working in the state sector.
Well, exactly. And someone like me who was educated in state schools, who worked in state schools, who looks the way that I do, I'm not really allowed to come out and accuse the education system of being broken. I meant to say things like, what we need is more money. And if we had more money, everything would be much better. And I was saying, actually, it's the ideas inside the system that are broken. And that's not to say that more money isn't great. I would love as a head to have more money. But ideas are the most important thing that makes any institution run well. And I was attacking progressive methods that are used in education.
Okay, and these progressive methods, there's been a lot of discussion in recent years about child-centred learning and all of this. Self-esteem matters as much as knowing about Shakespeare and all these ideas. We will come on to all of those ideas. Don't worry. But I mean, education has definitely become a battleground. It was a battleground with Tony Blair. It was a battleground with Michael Gove when he was Education Secretary, attacking what he called the education blob, and certainly going to be a battleground at the next general election. Of course, Brexit is going to dominate a lot of things, but for an awful lot of people, their local school, the school they can get their child into, the school that they went to, is a really big issue in their lives. And we know that the Labour Party have just announced, private schools, to all intents and purposes, tax breaks gone, a limit on the number of private school pupils who can get into university. They'll be effectively, to all intents and purposes, abolished. They want to get rid of grammar schools, selective education based on your child's ability. They also want to get rid of free schools and academies. Your school, Michaela, is a free school. Let's talk about the journey it took you to get to that point and how your school is doing, because a lot of what you've done, I think, is exactly what really every school needs to be doing if we are to deliver the sort of standards we want, so that, let's be honest, people like me, I'm a bog standard comp educated girl who now sends her child private. I wouldn't send my child private if all the schools were offering the standard of education. I don't mean the playing fields and the nice grounds, I just mean the standard of education in the classroom that certainly seems to be offered at your school to your pupils. So tell us what happened then. You spoke at Tory Party conference.
Yeah.
You were cheered to the rafters, standing ovation.
And then I was in a position where I had to resign from my job. So
you had to resign because you had criticised the system. You basically were forced out of your job.
Well, I mean, it's complicated, but yes, I would say that you're not allowed to say that sort of thing. Okay. And so then I thought about going into the private sector, but I'd always worked with disadvantaged kids, and it's what I do well, you know, and I feel like the private schools, I have nothing against private schools, but I feel like they have, you know, they've got some good teachers, they've got good pupils, they're doing a fine job. They don't need me. I felt like the kids I'd been teaching all my life needed me, and I wanted to be with them, and I need them, you know. So the only way I was going to get back, I was told by various headhunters and so on, I was told I would never work in the state sector again, and that the only way I could was if I set up my own free school. So I got a group of people together, and we set up Michaela, which opened in September 2014 with 120 children. We now have, we're all the way up to our sixth form, and of course we got our GCSE results first lot in August this year.
I remember seeing some social media postings about this school that was denigrated. You were denigrated by many in the state sector. Tell us how your kids did.
Yeah, well, so they did really well, you know.
I think you're maybe underplaying this.
Yeah, no.
You had some kids who were getting straight 9s at GCSE, and for those of us in old money, that's not an A grade. It's not an A star. That's an A star, isn't it? That's the new marking system.
And I mean, a quarter of our kids got in maths, for instance. They got the top grade, the 9. A quarter of them. We had children getting 7 to 9s. We half of our children were doing that. Like, I mean, it really was. It was amazing, and it was really exciting.
Was it what you expected? Were you confident they were going to do well?
I knew they'd do well. I didn't know exactly how they'd do, but I knew my thing to them was always, this is on you. When I would give assembly, I'd say, I've given you everything you could possibly need. You've got wonderfully silent corridors, which means you can move very quickly to your lessons, and you get every minute out of every lesson. You've got brilliant teachers. You've got an environment where answering questions is not something that's an embarrassment, where the bullies are going to get you for being that nerd. In fact, everybody's competing and wanting to be the best.
It's cool to be clever. It's cool to work hard.
It's cool to be clever. I've given you everything. There's nothing more for me to do. You now need to do the work at home. And most of them did. There were some who didn't, and I think that's right. I think that ultimately the results should be the responsibility of the child, and I'm very much a believer in personal responsibility. But of course, they need to be given an excellent education in the first place, so that it then is just up to them.
Okay, but let's bearing in mind the results you're talking about are the results which some pretty, good schools in middle-class areas with an intake of kids from, the professional middle classes would be expecting to get. That's not the intake of kids you've got in your school in North Wales. Describe the intake with a typical home life for the children at your school.
Yeah, so lots of fathers aren't necessarily around. Mums with 3, 4, 5 kids perhaps have a couple of jobs. Parents who don't have jobs at all. We would have. It's not unusual for boys to turn up on bikes, wearing masks, carrying knives, waiting to meet our pupils. One of our year 11s, when he came out of his exam, his GCSE exam, went outside the gates, and a bunch of other boys rushed him and stabbed him with a couple of compasses. Like that. That is, my staff every evening are out on the streets getting the kids on the buses so they can get home safe. Muggings are quite common. This is the inner city. Gangs are part of our lives. There was a pupil from one of the local schools who was killed by a South London gang not so long ago. There was another one that was stabbed far more recently. This is just part of our lives.
But okay, but the argument that we've got constantly in the education sort of fraternity is you can't deliver top grades unless you've got the money. Your school presumably doesn't get any more money than any other school.
No, it gets far less.
And if kids don't come from privileged middle class homes where they get walls and walls of books and every possible help at home, then they can't possibly get those results. And the argument has always been, but it's not our fault. We can't deliver these grades. We can't rescue these children. It's what's going on at home. It's what's going on in society, and it's a failure of the government to give all that money. So how on earth have you managed to do that?
Well, I do have excellent staff, and we have, I would say, a different set of values. I talked about personal responsibility. I always call my values small c conservative values. We believe in the idea of duty and honour and respectability. We want to, we talk about being the captains of our souls and being the masters of our fate. We believe in personal responsibility. There's far too much blaming of the outside all the time that can
because
happen
dad's
elsewhere.
not at home, I don't have to work at school.
That's right. Or teachers saying, because the kids come from difficult backgrounds, there isn't much we can do. They're poor, they're therefore not going to succeed, and there isn't much we can do. And there is always an element of truth to a lot of this, because I would say family does have a lot to do with a child's
Well, otherwise, why are the
performance.
rest of us bothering?
Yeah.
I mean, if
exactly.
every time I read a nursery rhyme to my child and put her to bed at the same time, if that has no impact whatsoever, I've just been out drinking all night.
Yeah, so we're trying to make up for often what they have not got at home. Children who come to us who have not reached their chronological reading age, and we catch them up. Children who aren't perhaps motivated in the way that they should be because their parents aren't saying the right kinds of things to them. So we do that systematically. It's about the implementation of various systems. I would talk about, when I mentioned earlier about teaching methods, our teachers stand at the front of the class and teach.
Is that allowed anymore? I thought we had child-centred teaching. I mean, this is the thing. We've had a whole sort of revolution. As someone who's a comp kid from the 1980s in secondary school years, we certainly still had to teach at the front of the class. But it's certainly got much, much more about child-centred learning and children discovering things for themselves. And yet there isn't really any evidence that children learn anything that way. So you've gone back, some might say, 1950s, old-fashioned teaching methods?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, there are some modern elements to it, but and I have to say that there are teachers across the country that will do this, but they will be doing that in their own individual classroom. The big difference at Michaela is that we're doing it across the school. When Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, who came recently to visit us, I was explaining to him about the difference, and he was saying, gosh, it's true. All the desks are in rows. The children are all looking at the teacher. At his old school, because he was at an ordinary state school, he said the desks were all in groups, and we were all looking at each other, having a chat, while the teacher was trying to keep us quiet at the front of the class, Like,
but the thing about this is, it's not complicated, is it? I mean, and if you actually look at how some of the top achieving schools around the world and top achieving schools in this country, what they all do the same thing. And it's interesting how many parents who are very sort of into this very laissez-faire sort of child-centred learning for everyone else's kids tend to choose very traditional schooling for their own children. I've noticed the front bench of the shadow cabinet often seem to do like a selective school or a grammar school for their kids, or even a private school. So in terms of the ethos of the children at your school, is the message very clear? Look, instead of you being able to excuse poverty as the reason why you can't do well, you're saying that's not an excuse. It's a no excuses culture. It's down to you. We're going to give you the tools, and it's up to you to take those tools and use them for your future, but also giving them an environment where that's safe. Now, you mentioned just in passing silent corridors. There's been quite a lot of criticism that you're the strictest head teacher in Britain. I mean, that instantly makes me like you, I've got to be honest. I'm quite old-fashioned on these things. But you don't allow talking in the corridors. Why not?
Yes. Well, I mean, they do say good morning and good afternoon. So the teachers will be dotted around and we'll all be saying good morning to each other. The reason is because if you have a challenging intake, so I understand that if your intake is not challenging, you might not need silent corridors. But if you are in the inner city, if you don't have that, you will end up with children screaming and shouting, running through the corridors, whipping doors open, punching each other, fights will go on. By the time they get to your lesson, you've already lost about 5-10 minutes. Then they're so high, you need to bring them down. And so the teacher has perhaps been advised, one of the things you learn on teacher training is to give them an activity right away so that they can just get on in silence and do it. So you can just get them to be quiet. As opposed to, great, everybody's in their seats. Let's go with some questioning right away. Let's get into this. Let's inspire you. It creates a totally different atmosphere in the lesson. One is about trying to subdue them because they're so high coming in, and another is about trying to inspire. And obviously, going the inspirational route means that the kids are much more awake and engaged. Hands are up. They want to answer questions. And you can create that culture when we were saying about it's clever to be cool. Because everybody's got their hands up, as opposed to the cool kid who turns up late and swings the door open and it bangs against the wall and, oh, I've arrived. And then all the kids start laughing. And then the teacher has to start again and so on. Like, we don't have time for that. We've got kids who we need to catch up. we've got kids, and when I say kids we need to catch up, even the ones at the top we need to catch up, because they are kids who could get to Oxford and Cambridge, but we need to teach them really well to get them to a point where they're going to be able to do that.
You're losing so many hours. I mean, there's been quite a lot of research that children at top schools are getting 2 years worth of education more. Simply, if you look at 10 minutes out of each lesson being lost.
That's right.
That's basically a day a week.
That's exactly
a couple of
what's
weeks a
going on.
term.
That's
and
right.
At the end of those 14 years of education, they are 2 years behind.
Yeah.
I mean, and
That's
that
right.
is, and then people say, oh, these private school kids are getting into, or grammar school kids getting into these top universities.
Well, I wonder why.
Imagine.
Yeah.
And crucially also, we are at least 2 years behind the top schools in some of the other leading countries. I mean, I don't know how much realistically our youngsters are going to end up competing with kids from China and from Singapore. But the reality is a lot of those teaching methods are spreading around the world. Our children in a very multicultural, very international city like London and in many other parts of the country as well, they are going to be competing against people who've been educated abroad. And if our education is not up to standards, they are simply not going to be able to compete, are they?
The key point here is that if you want to help the kids you're teaching, what I find always happens, and this is often coming from the left, is that they have good intentions. And so they want to do what's right for the kids, but because they deny traditionalism, all this progressivism is just holding those kids back. By having a no excuses culture, it means that those kids that come from poverty have to work extra hard in order to keep up. That's what you want. You don't want to say, it's okay, you don't need to do your homework because I know it's difficult for you at home because you don't have a desk to do it on. Because life isn't going to forgive you like that later. We need to get them working hard. Sometimes life isn't fair. And everybody's divvied up a different set of cards when you're born. You've got to take what you've got and make what you can of it. And you take personal responsibility for it. You don't spend your whole life blaming everybody else and saying it's because of racism, it's because of sexism, it's because of the establishment, it's because of my poor school. You take what you've got and then you go with it. Because otherwise you're going to be sitting on your bed at 85 years old, looking back at your life and saying, well, I was a failure, but it wasn't my fault. It was because of the family I was born in. It was because I was black. It was because I had a single mum. You can't do that. You've only got one life.
And this is where it comes down to excuses culture, and that's where it's not necessarily about poverty, it's poverty of aspiration, poverty of education and expectation, everything.
That's right.
But the interesting, that is often, those kids are getting that at home already. Don't bother with school. I never learned anything useful at school. Don't bother with that. And then when they go to school, that is the place where that's supposed to change, and yet it's not. Where did that culture come from, though? Because I agree with you. I think the teachers, I meet so many teachers from the left. People tweet me, they come on my radio show, and I know they're good people. I know they absolutely mean well. They desperately want these children to succeed. They feel passionate about making sure that poor children get ahead in life, and their role in helping them. And yet what they are doing is holding those children back. Why do they not see that what they're doing, as well-meaning as it is, isn't working, and then think maybe what I'm doing is wrong and maybe I need to do something different?
Well, some of them do. I was one of those people, right?
You were fully signed up to it,
I was a lefty teacher, thought all the standard things that a lefty teacher would think. I changed my mind. But it takes years. And it's also really difficult to change your mind, because then you have to accept that kids who you taught before, your ideas, that you actually failed those children. And to come to that conclusion is hard, right?
Everything I did the last 10 years was a waste of time.
Exactly. So the older you are, the more difficult it is to change your mind about these things. But it's also just the fact that you're not exposed to these ideas. It's a real bubble education, and it's a lefty bubble where everybody just they just reinforce what the other one thinks. So the reason why I changed my mind was because I wrote a blog called To Miss with Love, and what I found was that
you were known as Miss Snuffy.
That's right. Well, I still am known as Miss Snuffy on Twitter, and I would write something, and various lefties would come on and argue with me and get very angry. And various conservatives would come on and back what I was saying. And the lefties would say, you're such a conservative. And I would say, no, I'm a good person. I'm a really good person. I couldn't be a conservative. And the conservatives would come on and say, I think you'll find that you are a conservative. And eventually, after years, it took me years, right? And I realized, well, maybe I am a conservative because I'm always agreeing with them. And my values are small c conservative. Now, it takes a certain amount of bravery, especially in education, to say that out loud, because everyone is convinced that conservatives are evil.
Well, you see, everyone. This is what Michael Gove, when he was Education Secretary, used to talk about the Blob. This idea that, again, the teaching profession, which once used to be almost entirely Conservative with a capital C and with a small c, is now almost entirely left-wing. And not just Blair left-wing. They thought Blair was awful as well. Proper Corbynese left-wing.
Well, now, the policies that they're coming out with. I mean, abolishing private schools, abolishing SATs at primary schools.
God forbid we should know what children know.
I mean, this is it. Ofsted, and with no sense of what we're going to do instead. Like, we shouldn't hold anybody to account. Don't hold the primary kids to account. Don't hold the teachers to account. I mean, it's just mad.
But is this part of do they genuinely believe, a lot of these teachers, that this is all terribly unfair, and that of course they can't compete with the top schools and the middle class intake of those schools? Is it that they genuinely think, look, this is just not a sensible way of measuring what children know and the education they've got and their worth? Or are they actually afraid of being found out? Because one of the issues I've got, and I've got very good friends and family members who are teachers or have been teachers, and I've got absolutely respect for the teaching profession, where they're doing it right. But it does seem to me that the failure rate of education in this country is such that if this were public transport, we had that many trains that never arrived or arrived that late or were cancelled, if we had that many people whose survival rates from cancer were so far behind other countries, they're already behind now, but so far behind, if we had that level of failure rate in any other public service, there would be a national outcry, there would be a royal commission. We have 100,000 teenagers leaving school every year who don't have a worthwhile qualification to their name. 14 years of education. They can't even get a D or an E grade, old money in GCSE. No. Something must be going wrong. I realise these are probably not kids coming from lovely, happy, stable homes where mum and dad are saying, let me help you with your homework, and they're eating broccoli with every meal. Of course they're not. The teachers are having to battle against a lot of bad things that are happening in these kids' lives. But if you've gone to school for 5 days a week every term for 14 years and you can't get even 1 grade D GCSE, something's going wrong with the system, isn't it?
Yes, but there is truth on both sides. So teaching is very, very hard. And running a good school is very, very hard. And that is because there are so many broken families around. Yeah. So many of our families, they block the school number. Right? They just, you try and ring them. Yeah. Right now, our year 11s, I want to meet up with the families, give them advice about how to support their children going towards exams. Can't get through to them. Cannot get through to them because they don't want to hear from us, because they don't care, right? They just don't want the hassle. And then you think, well, how is that possible? Now, when those teachers are crying out and saying, well, it's not fair, there is truth in that, right? But that doesn't mean that we're also getting everything right, right? So when I talk about the progressive teaching methods, the lack of behavior systems in schools that are reinforced and are consistent across the school, these are real issues in the state sector. And it's difficult to know how much of what the teachers are saying is true and how much of what I'm saying with regard to behavior systems and so on and teaching methods is true. It is very tough. And it is true that obviously the easier your intake, the easier it is to get good results, right?
I mean, it's so obvious. They're just going to sit down. Children who've had a good night's sleep, they've had breakfast. Yes. They've got family who care about education, who want them to do well, who take it seriously, send them to school on time, in the right uniform. Of course, they're going to be easier to teach.
So, and it's that unfairness, right, that often the left is driven by a sense of what's fair. Yeah. And the other values that conservatives might value, when I talk about a sense of personal responsibility and a sense of duty, a sense of self-sacrifice, all of this sort of thing, many on the left don't value that as much as they value fairness. Yeah. And they feel, so when they say we need to abolish private schools, what they're saying is, I often say, it's like saying my house is a mess. And it's a mess because the house next door is bigger and has better facilities. They have a nicer kitchen. And if I just break down the house next door, then suddenly, miraculously, my house is going to get cleaned. And that isn't what's going to happen. For me, look, they're getting on with what they do in the private schools. Fine. Good on them. I wish them luck. I'm in my house, in my state sector, in my school. I'm going to try and make it as good as I can. And there are lots of things that are unfair. My kids don't have green at all. There's no green. There are no trees, no grass. The teachers cannot even park their cars there because we're using an old car park as the playground, which is so small we can't put all the children out there at once, right? We don't have a sports hall. I could go on, right? But you don't normally hear me talking about this sort of stuff and complaining and saying, this is unfair and the reason why my kids are oppressed is because we don't have a sports hall. I don't talk about that because I got to make do with what I've got.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. And we're all dealt different decks of cards. And one of the reasons why I enjoy it in the inner city is because it's a challenge. It's because, well, how do you make children happy and get them working hard in an environment that is not as privileged as, say, a private school?
Let's talk about bringing us back to private schools very neatly. And I think a lot of the arguments against private schools and grammar schools are very similar. The argument seems to be, look, there's a load of money going into these schools. That means that, of course, they're going to do better. There's a lot of middle-class kids with all the benefits they get from their home background going in. Of course, these schools are going to do better. They're going to get better teachers who are going to want to teach in the schools with the nice, easygoing kids. Of course, they get better results. And the argument often seems to be that if those children and if all that money and if those teachers were all in the state sector, the state sector would improve. Now, as somebody went to a comp who sends her daughter to a private school, I've always felt I need to say, because I do need to declare an interest. I can absolutely see very good arguments for getting rid of the tax breaks and charitable status and all that. I'm not wedded to any of that stuff. Put the fees up and that will actually push a lot of people out of the private sector. I think there's a perfectly good argument to make on that case. However, I do sometimes wonder, and it was something I wrestled with as a comp kid myself, that the idea that I don't think that my child should be in the state sector because she can help bring up results for the state sector, because frankly that's not her job. But it did occur to me that actually having a sharp-elbowed, pushy, demanding mum like me as a parent in the state sector would probably do my local school, state school, quite a lot of good. And if there were more of mums like me, dads like my husband, perhaps we could help improve things. Is there an argument that actually me opting out of the private sector has actually meant that the state sector is worse?
No. I know you're a very powerful woman, but I don't think you would be able
to.
Well, exactly. And I don't think you would be able to make much difference to the school. I don't think you would know what was required because my profession is a profession and I'm good at it because I've been doing it for over 20 years. And I think that often people outside of education underestimate the amount of knowledge and experience that's required to run a really good school. And I've seen it through, I don't know, various people, many governing bodies over the years I've known, people wwho are like you, come up with ideas. I think of an old governor I once used to know who, she said, in the day when mobiles had just come out, she said, well, it's such a great idea. You know what we should do? The kids are so good at texting, and we adults aren't. So we should have the children set up a class for the teachers to teach them how to text. So she was very middle class and very sharp-elbowed. They don't necessarily know what's right. Not only do they not necessarily have the right ideas, but they don't know about implementation, and this is key. People don't understand how hard it is to run a school and how to implement ideas and make it work on a daily basis, right? So I meet with my senior team every day at 7 a.m., right? We work really hard, and the finesse, the nuance and subtlety of the decisions that are constantly made and the judgment calls. People who aren't us can't do that. And if your daughter came to our school, well, I mean, you might say that the school was already doing what it needs to do, but I'm not sure you would know.
But it's very difficult for parents, indeed, to know what standard is a normal standard. What should a child know by the end of this term or this year? It's virtually impossible. And I know there's some books out, and people like Toby Young have written, look, this you also said about free school. This is what your child should know at this stage in their education. But with the curriculum changing, how are people? I meet people all the time who will say, oh, my kids are at a great school. If you look up, a recent Ofsted report, you think, it's not what the inspectors think.
They have absolutely no idea. When members of the press interview me and I'm saying the system is broken, and they say, well, why do you say that? My child is at state school and he's fine. And I say, how do you know? He comes home at the end of the day. You say, how was your day? He says, fine. He goes to his room. You have absolutely no idea what's happening in his classroom. You don't know if there's a culture of to be cool and work hard. You don't know whether he's being bullied. You don't know how well the teacher is teaching and the various teaching methods that are being used. You don't know if they're using spaced practice or interleaving. Or I could throw a whole number of words at you that wouldn't mean anything to you when it comes to how the brain learns and whether they're using those methods to make sure that those children are learning properly. We are a professional body. That's what we are.
That's the thing. It is. There is actually professional entry qualification.
Exactly.
But we're often told the comparisons with systems like Finland or wherever, where we're told, but they don't have private schools. In fact, turns out they do have private schools. A lot of these Scandinavian countries, but it's a much smaller sector. The argument is the state school system is so good that there's no point paying for a private education. Why would you need to? It's such a good system. But then you look into the qualifications a lot of those teachers have. It's quite normal if you're a nursery school teacher in Finland to have a PhD. Yes. Well, a nursery school teacher in the UK is far more likely to have a couple of NVQs and left school at 16.
Yes,
and that is the difference, isn't it?
There's that, and there's also the fact that the Finland education system it's changing, but was very much about knowledge being at the heart of the classroom, that it's not about child-centered learning, it's about the teacher driving the bus and driving those kids forward. It was about discipline and so on. Now, Finland has been changing, and I guarantee you in 10, 15 years, we're going to see the results change in Finland. We're already starting to see the results change in Finland.
But crucially, you think that you could abolish Eton and Westminster and St Paul's and all the other private schools tomorrow. You don't think that will do anything for the kids who... It would bring up overall state school standards, surely, because those kids would be in the state system getting their 10 grand's worth of tutoring, so much cheaper for the parents. 10 grand's worth of tutoring, they would be making sure I know what I'd do. I'd move into the catchment area. I'd have the money to move into a catchment area of a good school. House prices would rocket in that area. I'd make damn sure my kid got a good education by hook or by crook, using whatever I could, as I think most parents would try to do. Would that necessarily bring up the other kids in that school?
Well, I don't understand why anyone would think it would. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So you put a few kids who were clever enough to get into a private school that has an entrance exam, and then you put them in the class, and what happens? I mean, I don't understand.
Does the sort of knowledge base sort of leak out somehow?
That's madness.
Well, I know
I don't understand why anyone says that.
But this argument is made constantly on the left.
It is absolute
if you
nonsense.
if all of those grammar school pupils as well, we'll come on to that, but private school and grammar school pupils, if they were in the state sector, the teachers would be better in the state sector, you'd be able to teach to a higher level, those kids would bring up the other state of the other state. So
First of all, I am so insulted by this idea that the best teachers are at grammar schools and at private schools. I mean, you come and see my teachers. They are the best teachers in the world, right? They're absolutely amazing.
I thought it's much more rewarding teaching at a school like yours, because you can see the
they're so committed and they're so hard work. I mean, you will never find teachers like my teachers. It's an absolute nonsense to suggest that better teachers exist in the private sector. You know, I mean, it's just nonsense. So the fact is, I mean, you might have a few teachers who have some PhDs in the private sector who really like super clever kids, and it has to be those private schools with an entrance exam, and they really like those kinds of kids. But there's different things that make teachers good. So like there are teachers who have PhDs, but then there's teachers who are really inspiring and they're excited about what they're teaching and so on, and they just grab you and take you, you know? Like, look, that's an absolute nonsense. The other thing that's a nonsense is putting some clever kids or some well-supported kids at home into a school. Well, you might just create another set of kids. Like, it's not going to make any difference to the rest of the school. I mean, I don't understand it.
Even if it did have that effect, I suppose also that you are using then children as means rather than ends. You're basically saying, we will use you and your ability to help other children. I'm never entirely sure that that's the job of those children.
Look, I know schools, I know kids. This is what I know inside out. It will not make any difference. Okay, I'm telling you, it'll make no difference at all. I mean, what it would do is it would change the average overall in terms of the GCSEs you're putting out.
The schools would look better, wouldn't they?
So it looks better. So they're right that it would look better. It just wouldn't be any better, really. And I'm all about the truth. One of the reasons why there are a number of people who don't like me is because I tell the truth. So when I said the system is broken, it's because I think the system is broken. Yeah. And they're saying, well, you're not allowed to say that. We all know it's broken, really. But we're not going to say it's the emperor's new clothes, you know? And the fact is, unless we recognize and look at what the problem is, there's no way of fixing it. Now, I have to say, Michael Gove, I'm a great supporter of his in terms of what he did in the education sector, and he has brought about really great reforms. So we have better exams now, we have far less Mickey Mouse subjects and so on. So it's really good what he's done. There are other things that they could do moving forward. I mean, there are things like teacher training really needs to be addressed. This is something that Michael Gove never got to.
But also, I mean, discipline, I understand from every teacher I've ever spoken to, I think that teacher training is, 3 days or something? I think they might have upped it to 2 weeks in terms of the teaching discipline. Whereas actually, it doesn't matter how good you are at physics and how good you are imparting knowledge about physics. If you can't get the kids to sit down and shut up and listen, there's no point.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's one thing I have to say the Conservative government have also done really well. They've got Tom Bennett, who's the behaviour czar in the DFE, and he has a whole program of how to get behaviour to be better in our schools. And it's about systems. The reason why the academy changed, some of them can be very strong and really good at doing this. They go into a failing school and they turn it around because they implement systems. And it's about the implementation. I referred to that before. You need good staff implementing systems which can then just be brought out across the board. So you can if you want to change education nationally, you need systems being brought out across the board. This
has worked in this school, now it's worked in 10 schools, it can work in 100 schools.
That's right.
So when you look at the results from some of the schools in similarly deprived areas and similarly deprived children as yours, as pupils, does it make you angry? Because, as you say, if a company that sells, chocolate or bicycles or whatever fails, well, yeah, people lose their jobs and that's sad. But you know what? I can go to another shop to buy chocolate and I can go and buy a bicycle from someone else. But you only get one chance at education at the age of 5 and one chance of education at the age of 10 and one chance of education. You can retake some exams, but you never get those years back. It's so unbelievably vital that you get the right education at the right time. Does it make you feel angry? Do you feel sad? What does it do?
I feel sad. People always ask me what drives me. And what drives me are all those thousands and thousands of children that I've known over my lifetime who have been failed by the system. And they're often the poorest and most disadvantaged kids. And I love them. I just love them. You come to our school, our little year 7s are just the cutest things in the world. And they think I'm some kind of like I'm Madonna, and I come into their break hall and they go, Miss, and they're just so
Do
thrilled.
they call you Miss Snuffy?
No, of course not. I just love them and they just deserve a better chance in life, And so that's why we work really hard at Michaela, not just to have impact on our kids, but to have impact on the whole of the education system. Because it is changing. I promise you, it really is. There are people who are changing their minds all the time. People who follow me on Twitter who say to me, 2 years ago, I used to think differently, and I used to think you were awful, Katharine. And now I've changed my mind. I've been following you and listening to you.
Because the results don't lie. No, this is another thing.
Wait, but it's not just about the results. Yeah. It's also about the kinds of kids.
Yeah.
The thing I'm most proud about are the kids who they are. They're polite. They're lovely. I interviewed a caretaker yesterday, and he just couldn't believe it. He said, I've been working in schools all my life. I've never seen a school like this. The children are so well-mannered and so well-behaved. He said, I can't believe it's a school. I mean, he was bowled over, right? And he was saying how he has a 5-year-old son, and he wants to send him to our school because he wasn't talking about results. He doesn't even know what the results are of our school. He wants his child to be able to walk proudly with his shoulders back and shake your hand and look you in the eye and say please and thank you.
And the really frustrating thing about this is exactly the stuff that the top schools, whether they're private, grammar, whatever, state schools, that they're already doing. A lot of these simple life skills for how to get on in life.
Exactly.
It's not just about churning out the A grades or the 9 grades.
Exactly.
So let's talk about exactly how you go about doing that. You get a kid who turns up at the age of 11. And we know there's a real issue with kids who've actually done very well up to year 6, so the end of primary school, do very well, and then they start failing desperately in secondary school. And this is a very interesting phenomenon. I'm intrigued to know what you think that is behind that. But they turn up at 11, maybe dad's not been around very much, mum's working 2 jobs maybe, so you say nowhere to do the homework, parents who didn't really care about school, in low-paid jobs or no job at all, living on a sink estate, worried more about safely getting to and from school than anything that happens at school. How do you make school a place they want to be in, where they want to learn, and that they can do well and turn out well? What's the starting point? Is it uniform? Is it the silence in the corridors? Where do you start?
Well, it's all of that stuff, but yeah.
Does uniform matter?
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter in most schools around the world. So why does it matter here?
Okay, so it's another tool. So you can run a good school without a uniform. If you have a uniform, you must make sure you enforce it. Because if you don't, then you're telling the kids, we have rules that we don't care about. So if you don't have a rule, you better
don't have a rule you're not going to enforce.
Exactly.
Okay.
Whatever the rule, you mean what you say and you say what you mean. That's 101 in teaching, right? When you first start, you're told that. You cannot say something and not mean it. You've got to follow through because otherwise the kids don't take you seriously after that, right? And when the next time you say, well, I'm going to give you detention if you don't do your homework, they think you're not going to do it, right? So what was it you were saying? You asked me?
So you start with, so uniform matters.
Yeah, so uniform. Oh, I was going to say about broken windows. That was it. Broken windows theory is that you have a house in a poor area and all the windows are left intact, they will stay intact. You break one window, and over time, all of the windows will get broken. You need it all to look uniform and
this
perfect.
is just an idea. Well, if no one cares about this, they won't care about that, and it's just
Well, it's a small thing.
Apart.
So Giuliani turned around New York by removing the graffiti off the subway cars. And you think graffiti off the subway cars, like who cares, right? It's the same with the uniform. You keep those ties to the top and tuck the shirts in. People say, well, who cares? Because you look after the small things. You look after the pennies, and the pounds take care of themselves. You look after the tucked shirts.
And is that about the children being proud of their appearance, or is it about just an expectation that you will abide by the rules of the school?
Well, it's all of that. So you abide by the rules of the schools, but you have to be outraged by the smallest thing. So do I care if their ties are down? Yeah. Of course I don't care. Do I care if they've forgotten a pen? I mean, am I genuinely outraged? No. But I pretend to be outraged because then they think, I better get my pen. I better get my tie up. Oh my goodness. Oh, make sure I look right. And then they're not carrying knives, right? The fact is,
you think there's a link between those two?
Definitely. Look, all children want to rebel. If the fence is tight, then to rebel, you leave the shirt out. Yeah. To rebel, well, you bring the wrong pen. Kids are not allowed clicky pens at our school, right?
I love that rule.
Click, because click, 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 and it interrupts the school. You're rebelling, you bring in your clicky pen. At another school, where they don't have that rule, well, maybe you bring in a knife. They will always rebel. Okay?
Give them silly little things to rebel about.
Exactly, okay. And that's what a uniform does. Right. But uniform also makes it so that you're following the rules, also gives you unity. Yeah. So one of the things that we're really big on is being British, right? Yeah. We are all British
together.
Whoa,
I mean, careful there. Are we allowed to do that anymore?
Yeah, well, we do, and it's always a bit shocking. We sing God Save the Queen and Jerusalem, and we do it together because we are a family. I talk about the Michaela family.
Do you have a winter festival, or do you have Christmas at your school?
No, we have Christmas.
A lot of schools, there's been a whole big thing, this whole sort of this pretending we don't have all the sort of the British traditions, the Judeo-Christian traditions that have actually sort of created the society that we have and the values, the legal system and everything that we have. And there are so many schools that are trying to be all sort of right on and woke and just sort of say, oh, we don't do any of that. No hymns, no Christmas, winter festivals and all that.
I didn't even know what you meant when you said winter festival. I'm glad you said Christmas. I mean, we have Christmas, but we also Eid and Diwali. We talk about these and we celebrate and we do assemblies and so on. I mean, of course we would. In the same way as when we recognize the 11th of November and we all wear a poppy, we do assemblies on the varied sacrifice that was made from Britain's varied communities. Yeah. It wasn't just white soldiers, it was black soldiers, it was Muslim soldiers and so on. So it's just about celebrating everyone as opposed to celebrating no one, right?
So it's all about, so much of this is the ethos. And do you find that children, well, obviously you find that children learn better in that environment, but the message seems to have been from the education blob for a long time that you have to choose between children being happy and children getting good results. And that somehow, or children being able to do these wonderful extracurricular activities like sport, like music, like art and drama, and them getting good grades at English and maths and chemistry. Whereas, of course, all the best schools, actually you'll find the pupils who are captain of all the teams and play in the orchestra are also the kids getting the top grades as well, I usually find.
Yes.
But does a teacher of a school with an intake like yours in a poorer area, do you have to make a choice between getting them decent GCSEs and kids being happy and well-rounded?
Well, I would say that children are happy when they feel successful. If you can't read, it's very difficult to be happy. And 20% of our children leave school, not our children, nationally, leave school functionally illiterate and functionally innumerate.
Yeah. I mean, that's in a first world country.
I mean, exactly. It's crazy. And you spend your whole life not really being able to function in society, not being able to count your change in a shop. It makes you a very unhappy person. We teach gratitude as well, so that the children are always grateful for what they've got, no matter how little it is, because it makes you into a happier person. When you come to our school, you'll only see happy children. And that's because they're so thrilled to be learning. You know, there's an environment where success is celebrated. If success is dumbed down, where everybody's given a prize, where kids know that it doesn't really mean anything when you do something good.
No one wins on sports day.
Yeah. That is what makes you unhappy, right? I don't understand, again, why are they saying you're either happy or you do well? It's doing well that makes you happy. But it's the unfairness thing. Yeah. They don't like the fact that some children do really well and some children don't do as well. And so they want to when they say level the playing field, they just want everybody to be the same.
But they want everyone to come down.
Well, that's necessary.
Isn't that what it means? Because
Yes.
we're constantly told, I say this all the time on my show, every child has a unique talent. Every child is special. With all due respect, I don't think even every adult is, let alone every child. I think there are an awful lot of us who are just completely very average, thank you very much, and will muddle through life quite happily, but aren't necessarily. The idea that every child could, if they'd been born into a well-off home and been read a nursery rhyme every night, every child could get an A star. I mean, there are lots of kids who come from very wealthy families who don't end up getting that, so that would suggest not. But do you think that even the aims on the left of making everything fair and equal, do you think that is even if it was desirable for everyone to be exactly the same, would that even be achievable at all?
Well, I could, but then we'd be in a communist country. I mean, that's essentially the drive that they have. It's they're fighting power. And they don't like the fact that there are some people in authority, that the teacher is an authority. They want everybody to be the same.
And that includes the teacher and the pupil as the same, effectively.
Yeah, so one of the things that some lefties will say is that the teachers are learning as much as the children.
Ew.
And I'm like, well, then there's something wrong with you as a teacher.
You're not teaching very much then.
There's something wrong.
I'm just of you, other than saying something amusing, that 11-year-olds don't have much to teach you.
I mean, exactly. And, they'll be able to teach you about how to use your phone and how to play certain video games. I mean, they teach me loads about video games. But, I mean, there's nothing wrong with us being in charge as adults. Parents need to be in charge of their children. Often parents are scared of their own children and they feel awkward about telling their children what to do when that's their role in life. Yeah. We owe it to our children to lead them and show them what to do.
And finally, what about, and again, the battles over the grammar schools and the private schools and the state comps and free schools and academies has been about what gets taught and well, it's so much easier to teach, every single historical battle and every king and queen and all those facts in a school where everyone's sitting there waiting to learn and they're all miserable and they're rote learning. But the knowledge, this idea that knowledge and facts aren't as important as the process of learning how to learn. This has been a really strong message that's been coming out of schools. One of the things that I've always felt quite strongly about is that actually just simply knowing facts, having read books, having actually knowing some mathematical equations, knowing if you're in science periodic table, having actual knowledge of historical facts matters, doesn't it?
Yes, although the caricature of knowledge being central in the classroom is that it's just about rote learning. And
you're sitting at a desk just repeating.
This is not, and that's just a nonsense. In fact, that never happens at Michaela. It's that we have knowledge which is central. We still have the goal of being skilled at the end, but it's the knowledge that makes you skilled. Yeah. If instead you're teaching some kind of nebulous transferable skill, you're not teaching them anything at all. So for instance, you want them to be able to be independently minded and you want them to be able to give their own opinion about things. So you get them to write an essay about their school uniform. Do you like it or do you not like it? And why do you not like it? They write that, but they already knew that. Yeah. If on the other hand you studied Macbeth, and then talked about your opinions of Macbeth, the character, and was he good or was he bad and why and so on. Well, then you've given them the knowledge to have an opinion about it. You cannot be independently minded about something and disagree with somebody unless you know something about it. And the reason why often in schools you'd be writing these essays about uniform, for instance, is because they're taking something they already know, because they don't see knowledge as centre to the classroom.
And is this also part of the poverty of expectation, this view that, well, they couldn't possibly understand that. They wouldn't understand, this complicated chemical equation. They wouldn't understand this bit of history or this bit of literature.
They want to make it relevant for them.
Now this is the thing. This is also, it's not just making it relevant, isn't it? It's about the need for children to be having fun and being entertained all the time.
Yes.
Now, I'm all for having lessons. When you hear about these wonderful teachers who are just utterly inspiring, and the children are coming out and just loving their subject. That's wonderful. But fundamentally, I was at school. You were at school. You didn't love every lesson. There's some stuff you just have to learn.
Yes. Well, yes. And the thing is that the more difficult the kids who are in there, the more challenging their backgrounds, the more likely you are to try and make it more relevant. So you're teaching them French. You think, ooh, French verbs are a bit dry. I know what I'll do. I'll do a French rap. I'm teaching them English. Well, Shakespeare's really hard, the language, to get through. So what I'll do is I'll do Benjamin Zephaniah because he's black and these kids are black. And so they'll identify with him and it's a little bit more cool. But what you end up doing inevitably is shutting them off from the knowledge that's going to make them more powerful in the end, that's going to give them a life. And the thing is, these kids can access it. They don't need to be the same color as the author who's written the book. They don't need to
be the
to
same
have
gender.
the same gender. They don't need it to be all jingly and fun in that way. They just need it to be interesting. And that requires a teacher who's passionate about his subject. It requires an environment in the classroom where children feel it's cool to be clever and they want to learn. It requires a relationship with the teacher where they trust the teacher to lead them, as opposed to children just leading themselves. If children are leading themselves, well, then you do need to do rap, don't you? Because, well, they don't know what else to do. It has to be relevant because they need to find it fun enough to just do it themselves.
Yeah. Just finally, 'cause,
Yes.
I mean, you and I could talk about this for days.
Yes.
I love your passion. I think it's wonderful. Given what you've done at your school, and we have seen some other schools that have been turned around by these superheads we hear so much about, and this is a school that you've founded and set up, and you've got you have your first intake of A-level pupils this autumn. They're going to be going through. We'll see how well they do, and I'm sure very well indeed. If you can do it with your intake in your school, with your facilities, and deliver the good grades and happy, well-rounded individuals who I'm sure most employers would be very, very happy to have in their workplace. Is there any excuse for any school not to do it?
Well,
why are you so reticent?
Well, because I understand the pressure on teachers to think in a certain way.
Yeah.
If the teacher training system teaches you to do all the wrong things, if your senior management tell you that you're failing if you're doing the right things, if the head is under so much pressure just from society, from the education system,
from the league tables,
to do all the wrong things, then I can understand why they do it, right? You have to be quite brave to step out of that mold. And it may be unreasonable for us to just damn all these people and say, well, look, you should be brave enough to be able to reject all of that. It's too hard. Now, all of us, there are a whole bunch of us out there fighting to change the system, and we are changing it. I suppose I would want to ask your audience who are teachers and who are heads just to be brave and to go in the opposite direction of what you're normally told to do.
Because the thing is about these kids, you get a second chance every time you get a new intake. Those kids don't get a second chance.
No, that's right.
Katharine Birbalsingh, I think you're absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
I think you've done a wonderful thing for those kids, and I admire your courage and bravery in actually speaking out. And you've taken a lot of flack over the years, but if you deliver the goods for the kids, that's all that matters in the end.
Thank you.
Katharine Birbalsingh, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for watching the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. If you've enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to like it, to review, to comment, and also to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Julia Hartley-Brewer. You can find it under the hashtag JHB Show. And also, don't forget to share on social media so other people get to enjoy the conversation too. Thank you.